Welcome to today's Explainer. We are literally stepping back in time to a world of massive geopolitical shifts. We're talking ancient empires colliding and powerful prophecies completely erasing the established borders of the ancient Near East. Today's text reveals a really profound truth, that in this sweeping historical narrative, God's sovereignty isn't just limited to Israel. It actually spans across all nations.
Hello everyone, this is TN Inside. Let's begin by reading today's scripture passage from the book of Jeremiah, chapters 46 to 48.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, prophecies of the nations. Second, Egypt and the rising empire. Third, Philistines face the torrent. Fourth, Moab's pride and downfall. And finally, number 5, compassion and future hope. To truly wrap our heads around this text, we have to anchor ourselves in history. We're looking at a very specific window of time, kicking off around 605 BC. This is an era totally defined by the sweeping conquests of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Think of this guy as the ultimate disruptor of the ancient world. He was basically a one-man wrecking ball to the established order. Over just a handful of decades, Babylon systematically dismantled the region. So as we read these prophecies from Jeremiah, we are essentially tracking Nebuchadnezzar's military campaigns right across the map, watching the macro-historical timeline align perfectly with the biblical text.
Section 1. Egypt and the Rising Empire. Jeremiah 46.
Set precisely in the 4th year of Judah's King Jehoiakim, this brilliantly illustrates a massive power shift of the era. On one side, you have Egypt, the traditional, long-standing powerhouse that actually boasted of rising like the Nile and covering the earth. And on the other side, you have Babylon, the hungry, rapidly rising empire. Well, these two superpowers met in 605 BC at the Battle of Carchemish. This was a totally critical military and trade junction right by the Euphrates River. And in this decisive clash for dominance, Pharaoh Necho was completely defeated by Nebuchadnezzar. Egypt's influence just plummeted overnight, and Babylon officially took the crown as the dominant regional power. Drilling down from that massive battle into the text itself, the Lord uses some incredibly specific, colorful metaphors to describe Egypt's sudden shame. Egypt was once compared to a beautiful heifer, which basically represented their immense wealth and comfort. Yet destruction is prophesied to come swooping right in from the north. And even more stinging than that, Pharaoh himself is called an empty braggart, who entirely missed his appointed time. The text paints this chaotic scene of utter panic, with Egypt's hired soldiers turning and fleeing, desperately crying out to escape back to their homelands because they simply couldn't stand against the overwhelming battle brought by the Lord. But right in the middle of this heavy oracle of destruction against Egypt, the text introduces a fascinating contrast. While the traditional powerhouse of Egypt falls into shame, a promise is unexpectedly given to Israel. The Lord declares that while he will completely destroy the nations that had scattered them, he will not completely destroy Israel. Instead, he promises to deliver them from afar, saving them from captivity, and disciplining them only with justice. It's just a striking reminder that even in the midst of total global chaos, justice and preservation can still coexist.
Section 2. Philistines face the torrent. Jeremiah 47.
Delivered just before Pharaoh attacked Gaza, the text uses this incredibly vivid metaphor. It says waters would rise from the north, becoming an overflowing torrent that would sweep through. This terrifying, unstoppable flood prophesied the complete and utter destruction of the Philistines. And if we look at the history, this perfectly aligns with Nebuchadnezzar's forces sweeping down from the north around 604 BC, leaving the people to just wail in despair. Now, what's really interesting here is the human element behind all this warfare. You might be wondering, why did this happen? Well, the text points directly to Philistine idolatry. Faced with this overwhelming Babylonian torrent, the Philistines turned to their false idols. They even engaged in the incredibly desperate practice of bodily self-mutilation, literally cutting themselves, in this frantic hope to appeal to their gods for salvation. But as you'd expect, their cries for help utterly failed. Because of their idolatry, they were destroyed, scattered, and ultimately ceased to function as a nation entirely. God.
Section 3. Moab's pride and downfall, coming from Jeremiah 48.
To really understand Moab's fall, we have to grasp their national identity. And that identity was completely wrapped up in their god, Chemosh. The Moabites were quite literally called the people of Chemosh. You see, in ancient warfare, victorious armies didn't just conquer land, they conquered the spiritual identity of the defeated by literally seizing their idols right out of the temples.
The text declares that Chemosh, this supposed great protector, would become nothing more than a spoil of war, packed up and taken into captivity right alongside Moab's priests and officials. It is a devastating picture of a nation left utterly defenseless.
The source text draws a very direct, neutral parallel right here. On one side, you have the northern kingdom of Israel, who fell into the trap of idolatry at Bethel with the golden calf, and they were put to shame because of it. On the other side, you have Moab, whose idolatry centered completely around Chemosh. Despite being vastly different nations with entirely different cultures, they both fell into the exact same trap of idolatrous sins, and consequently, both face the exact same horrors of war and ultimate shame.
The prophecy concerning Moab, which was delivered around 602 BC, outlines a scoop of devastation that is just absolute. Every city destroyed, every valley laid waste, every plain ruined. Even the orchards of joy and gladness would just disappear. This totality of destruction was eventually fulfilled in 582 BC by Babylon. But why was it so absolute? Well, shifting our focus east to the Dead Sea, Moab was situated on this remote, highly elevated plateau. They lived in deep comfort. Honestly, they were kind of like the trust fund kids of the ancient world. They had never even gone into captivity. This long historical peace bred a fatal arrogance and pride against the Lord, and that became the very root of their downfall. So the text unpacks this deep-seated pride using some classic ancient biblical metaphors, horns and arms. These are the universal symbols of strength and honor in that world. Moab had used their comfortable, secure position to constantly torment and mock their kin, Israel, especially when Israel was struggling and falling. Moab's pride was so famous it literally became proverbial. But the text declares a severe, unyielding judgment. Moab's horn was cut off and its arm was broken. Their proverbial pride was forcefully turned into total ruin, making them an object of scorn among all the surrounding nations. Section 4. Compassion and Future Hope. So the crucial point we need to take away here is this incredible human paradox. Even as Jeremiah delivers these remarkably harsh, absolute declarations of ruin, what does he do? He weeps. He considers the impending, tragic fate of Moab, and he mourns for them. And actually, he wasn't alone in this. The prophet Isaiah also grieved over Moab's disaster. Think about that for a second. You have a prophet who sternly proclaims total, unavoidable judgment on an enemy nation, yet his heart remains tender enough and full of enough deep love and compassion to literally weep over their downfall.
And this exact compassion is echoed by the Lord himself with a totally fascinating theological twist at the very end of chapter 48. After pages and pages of sheer devastation, the Lord promises, in the last days, he would restore Moab's fortunes. This is huge. It reveals that God's overarching plan of salvation was never strictly limited just to Israel. It extended to the nations. It extended to all of humanity.
Which brings us to our final thought. The text's reference to the last days points directly forward to the Messianic era, a time when the path to salvation and restoration is thrown wide open to absolutely everyone who repents, completely regardless of their past. So I want to leave you with this question. If absolute judgment fell on these ancient, seemingly invincible nations, what does that enduring promise of restoration in the last days mean for humanity today? It's a powerful, deeply personal concept to consider long after this explainer ends. Thanks so much for joining me today as we unpack these ancient, world-shifting texts.